name is Daniel Rock, and I am an ELA literacy specialist at the Georgia Department of Education. And I'm here with Aquilyn Jones. Welcome, Aquilyn.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Aquilyn is an English teacher, 10th grade English teacher, and yearbook at Arabian Mountain High School. And you've agreed to join us today for our Common Core Tools webcast. And what we're going to do is look at a unit that you taught, and we're going to look at your goals and objectives, some strategies you used, and how you gave feedback, how you integrated the standards, and what product they came up with, and how you worked with them in developing their product.
Okay, sounds good.
So tell us about the unit that you were teaching. What were your goals, your big objectives, and what were some of the main texts that they were going to read?
Okay, well, one of my main objectives for this unit was for the kids to come into contact with some informational text. So often, especially with the older standards, we were accustomed to just really focusing on, literary text and hadn't really had too much experience with informational. So with this unit, the students had to read a nonfiction book. It was a graphic novel called Moss, and it's the story of a man who survived the Holocaust and his survival story. So I wanted them to read that because it was something that, happened. And at the same time, I wanted to supplement that or to add to it by providing them some informational text to put into context what really happened at that time. So I selected a speech by Elie Wiesel, who is another well-known Holocaust survivor. He wrote the book Night. And so I selected his speech, The Perils of Indifference, where he goes into detail about what happened to him and also just how indifference is what tends to permeate a lot of our world. So I felt that the students needed to think about that in the real life context as well.
So the extended text is Mouse, which you read over the course of 4 weeks.
Yes.
And to build the context of the ideas of the Holocaust and the consequences of all of that,
right,
and perspective, you had them read the short speech.
Yes.
So what did you want them to do? What was sort of the product you wanted them to create
right
from reading that?
Well, ultimately, after reading the speech, I wanted them to write an argumentative or persuasive essay in which they answered the question on whether or not society has become more or less indifferent. And I wanted them to be able to use textual evidence from the speech itself to support their claim.
So it's an argumentative essay about the theme that sort of predominates both texts.
Exactly.
And what specific standards would this address?
Okay, well, the first standard it addresses is the writing standard, first of all, which is number 1, to write arguments to support claims and analysis of substantive topics or texts using valid reasoning and relevant and sufficient evidence.
And I think that what you're getting there is substantive, what's the word, substantive?
Substantive.
Topics.
Right.
This would go under that.
Yes.
And that's a big shift to the Common Core, I think, is we really want kids to write things worth writing about and read things worth reading.
Right.
So that definitely does it there.
Exactly. And to be able to support, with sufficient evidence and not just give their opinion on what they think, yes or no, society has become different, but why? And use some things that Elie Wiesel said to support your opinion.
Okay. And what about reading standards?
Well, the reading standard was mainly reading informational text. The first one, citing strong and thorough textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly. So the first thing is that they had to not only read it, but they had to understand what he was saying explicitly and the argument that he was offering. The fourth standard under reading informational said to determine the meaning of words and phrases as they are used in the text, including figurative, connotative, and technical meanings. And before we even began reading, I asked the students what the word indifference meant, if any of them knew what it meant. And some of them had a general idea, but most of them didn't. So we talked about it and kind of used some kind of context clues. So I wanted them to know going into it before we even started, this is what indifference is. Right. We also talked about some real life situations where people have an opportunity to be responsive or non-responsive, and what indifference means to us today in our society before we started reading.
So you pulled out those key terms that were critical to learning, and you helped the kids understand those words. That definitely is standard 4.
Yes.
And what other reading standard?
Also, I identified analyzing historical documents of literary significance, and this is a speech that Elie Wiesel gave in 1999 in the White House with the then President Bill Clinton. And he's just a person that, so much of our country has honored him for what he experienced in, surviving Auschwitz, which was one of the worst, concentration camps that was in existence during the Holocaust. So I felt that by analyzing this document, his speech has been, classified as one of the greatest speeches that he ever gave. So I wanted them to be able to, have some information or have some contact with that.
And the integration of knowledge standards is all about connecting texts.
Exactly.
So that's what they're reading. Mouse, they've learned from Mouse, and they're reading this. Mouse is a sort of gray area, whether it's fiction, because the characters are mice.
Exactly.
But the author said, that's my story. That's my dad's story.
Right.
So don't call it fiction. So that's its own issue.
Exactly.
But they're talking about these two texts.
Right.
So quickly, did you get this unit from the Department of Education frameworks?
Yes, there was a unit that was specifically written based on this novel. And so I took that unit and I looked at it. It was a great unit. It had lots of resources that for me to use. But for the sake of time, I could only do so much. So we were in the novel for about a month or so, and then the speech was kind of the thing that we did at the end. One thing that the unit that you all provided for us recommended was to use the Declaration of Human Rights that the United Nations or the UN has on their site. And after looking at that, it's a great document, but I felt like I wanted the kids to really have a more personal, understanding of it. So much of what Eloise talks about in the Declaration, in the Perils of Indifference, is those same rights that are mentioned in the Declaration of Human Rights. So they're still getting, the same kind of context with, seminal documents and historical documents and things of that nature.
And that, was an important decision you made based on your audience, your students, based on your interests and what you thought would enrich the class. And that's an important decision that teachers around Georgia have been making. Thank you. And as we go into our next segment, we're going to look at the how you got the kids to read this text.